So when a lot of folks talk about crypto, they tend to focus on these, the media headlines are about prices, like up and down, and that's fine. Then there's a lot of people talking about really specific decentralized computing applications. So we thought we'd actually take a step back because our session is called The Case for Decentralization. And I would love to talk with you, Dixon, about actually why we care about this, and quite frankly, why anyone in this room should care about it.
My goal will be to hopefully kind of explain a little bit of these concepts, and I would love to, if I could, encourage people that are curious about the topic to learn more and potentially
Crypto curious.
And potentially join the kind of movement, the community, because we're always looking for more entrepreneurs and more people to join. So I kind of look at this through the history of computing in general. So if you kind of go back in the history of computing, computers invented in the 30s and 40s. And then roughly every 10 to 15 years, there was a new kind of major wave of computing. So there were mainframes, and then mainframes in like the 50s and 60s, mini computers in the 70s, PCs in the 80s, the internet in the 90s, smartphones in the 2000s. And so to me, like one of the interesting questions, like whether you're interested in crypto or not, is just sort of what's next, right? Like and I think there's different ways to look at it. One of them would be maybe this is it, like, smartphones are kind of the final stage, and there's a whole bunch of cool stuff people are doing on, now that you have a smartphone in your pocket, you can do things like, Uber and Lyft and all these other cool services, and people are doing great stuff in fintech and SaaS and consumer apps. And by the way, at our firm, we invest in all sorts of things like that, and we're very excited about all that stuff. But there's also this question of like, is there going to be another kind of wave of computing and a new kinds of devices and things like this? And so there's various candidates, I think, for that. For example, virtual reality, augmented reality. There's a really cool article in Wired today.
Yeah,
about
it was on augmented reality.
I was reading the Kevin Kelly, who we love. There's self-driving cars, AI, wearables, talking speakers like Alexa style, and then there's blockchains. And I think of blockchains or crypto as being really being a new type of computer.
Actually, let's pause there for a moment, because that's actually a really important concept to talk about. And when most people talk about blockchains, I've heard definitions like it's a decentralized distributed ledger, and then they get into arguments about how is this different than Excel spreadsheets or other databases. Or there's other people who talk about it in very philosophical, lofty terms. How would you really sort of get into the weeds of what that is?
I mean, I think that some of it has to do with the history of it. Like all of this stuff kind of started with Bitcoin, which is sort of more focused on a specific application. But if you look at something like Ethereum and a lot of the new blockchains, they really are computers in the sense of, going back to the original definition of a computer, Alan Turing. A computer is something that both stores data and then operates on that data. You can write software for a computer. Like the key property of a computer is you can write software for it, right?
So you can write software for it.
You can write software for it, which means it's like a blank canvas. It's a creative canvas upon which I think of software development as a creative art, where you can invent new things, and you look at the history of computing. There was this really interesting interplay in the past between what I would call platforms and applications. So, the PC first came out in 1977, the Apple II came out. The first people that bought it were engineers and developers and programmers, and really the main use case was programming. It's really funny actually to go back and look at the ads at the time. They were struggling to figure out what was the mainstream use case, and so they always said recipes for some reason. If you go back and look at like the ads from like 1979, they thought the computing industry was trying to figure out the killer app, and they thought it was going to be recipes. So they always had these things of like the happy couple sitting at the kitchen table looking up the recipe on the computer, which of course we do today on like an iPad or something, but wasn't really the killer app, right? The killer app was actually invented later. It was things like spreadsheets and word processors. If you go back and look at it in the 80s, it was like desktop publishing, it was Photoshop, right? So, but what happened was that there was this interplay between the platforms, the computers, and the applications. The same thing happened with the web. Same thing happened with smartphones. If you think about why do you love your iPhone or Android phone, like part of it, people always say Moore's Law, they get better and faster, and of course your iPhone X is better than your iPhone 2, but it also has Instagram and a whole bunch of other applications, which also, right? I mean, so it's both those things. It's both the computers getting better, but then, and what happens is the computer gets better partly because the applications get, creative applications come up. That makes the computer more popular, which in turn encourages investment in both sides, and there's this flywheel. And in each of those cycles, by the way, as a group of entrepreneurs, there's a whole series of entrepreneurs in each cycle who kind of ride that hyperbolic sort of superlinear growth wave, and it's really the greatest time for startups. It's typically, I think, it's like the best times the best times in each kind of wave of computing, if that's your focus. Like I said, there's other legit great focuses in startups, but if your focus is sort of these new platforms, there's sort of the early experimentation phase. So you could try to be, Steve Jobs and Wozniak and build an Apple II. And today the equivalent is building a new layer, what we call layer 1 blockchain, and like a new kind of cryptocurrency. That sort of, to me, is sort of like the Apple II or the Commodore 64 or Mosaic or the Sidekick or the iPhone, or you pick your favorite example. But then there's a second wave that I think we're probably going to enter in a few years, which will be this application wave, where you'll have a whole bunch of opportunities to create the next series of kind of killer apps for this new platform.
Where are we right now, though? Because honestly, I'm excited about this too. Obviously, I am. Why is this such a fundamental shift?
Yeah. Well, so I think that goes partly to what's special about blockchains. Like, why do we care about blockchains? So, what is a blockchain? Maybe I'll start with that. A blockchain is you hear different definitions. The definition I like is it's a system by which many computers come together to create kind of a new kind of meta computer. And that meta computer has this property of being able to make certain trust guarantees to users and to developers and to other people that you can't make on a traditional computer. So, you think about, our relationship with computers used to be simple when on the PC era. You had a computer in your home, you had your data on your computer, it was yours, that was it. It's sort of similar today with your phone, right? But then with the development of the internet, it became more complicated, right? Now, is my data that I keep at Facebook or Google has, is that my data? Is it your data? I'm using your computer, it's not my computer, but there's a terms of service, and we see what all these issues that have come up, throughout society and for individuals. People are upset that they feel like their data is being misused. People, there's a lot of debate around how these algorithms work, how much power they have. And we kind of backed into this, right? I don't think there was like a plan, at least I wasn't privy to it, like this plan for hey, let's start off with baby pictures. Next thing you know, they're determining like who wins the election. Like that wasn't the plan that I don't know. I think most people had.
Or like cat pictures. I mean, in a good way, leading to deep learning in a good way. But
we kind of backed into it, right? So what's cool about blockchains is they have this new property where you can bake into the code is law, is what I would say. Sort of, you can bake into the code what the rules of the system are, and they're transparent. It's all open. All of these systems are open source. All the data is open source. Anyone can audit it. You can see what the rules are. That means if you're an individual and you're using something like Bitcoin, there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoins. It's built into the code. It's built into the system. No individual can change it. The people behind Bitcoin, the people running the mining equipment, the people running the code, they can become evil. It's not, as I'd like to say, it can't be evil. Don't be evil. Like you don't have to hope they don't become evil. They can't become evil. I mean, there's theoretical ways in which like 51%, I they call it, where the majority kind of can take over, but it's much, much harder for these systems to get, for individual people to corrupt these systems.
People to participate.
Yes, and so that creates all sorts of guarantees for users. You can make guarantees. Bitcoin's just the very beginning, right? So like you can make guarantees far beyond kind of financial things. You can make guarantees about how your data is going to be treated. You can make guarantees to developers. If you're an entrepreneur and you're building on top of a platform, if people that built on top of Facebook and Twitter and lots of other platforms learn this lesson kind of the hard way, which is the platform can change the rules, and that
they pull the carpet out from under you.
It's called platform risk in venture capital, right? It's a significant risk, and so at least that doesn't mean you can't have that. You won't have that risk here, but it'll be transparent. It'll be baked into the code, and so you can see those risks up front, and you can decide where what you want to commit your data to as a user, what as a developer or as an entrepreneur you want to commit your time to. I have this blog post, if you're interested, it's called Why Decentralization Matters, and it has this kind of what I argue is every centralized kind of network effect platform follows kind of an S curve of growth. I mean, that part's obvious, but they kind of follow this S curve of growth. But the less obvious part is in the early phases, they try to attract what economists call complements. So in the case of Facebook, they try to attract the newspaper companies because they want more news at early Facebook. But then over time, what happens is, and then in the growth period, it's fine, sort of, let's call it like, social networking circa 2008 through 12, everything's growing, it's sort of, we have enough to share, right? But then at some point, these things kind of hit the top of the S curve, right? I mean, like, Google's 20% year-over-year growth or whatever, they start to hit this thing, and then it becomes kind of the extract mode where, like, you see, like, Yelp is going up in front of Congress, talking about how Google's changing the rankings, right? I mean, at this point, like, you look at, like, the dynamics of Google's kind of ad engine.
So the inflection in the S curve is attract to extract.
Yeah, and like it's happening with Google now, where they have to, if you built your business on SEO, which a lot of entrepreneurs did, TripAdvisor, Yelp, et cetera, then at at the beginning, you were the top organic result. Like, it's kind of hard to get Yelp. I have to type Yelp and the restaurant name to get it now because they put so many paid ads and they put their Google stuff and they put everything else. Why? Because at a later stage in the network growth, they have to do that in order to continue the growth, right?
Right.
And so and I'm not blaming Google or Facebook for it. I think, we're friends with those people. We like the great companies. I think they've done amazing things. Having a magical search engine supercomputer in your pocket, is like an amazing invention. But it's just sort of the logic of these organizations, right? Like that's just what happens when you set it up in this way, and they didn't, and it's their right to do it. They didn't make a commitment, right? There was no commitment made. But I think people like me think, now for the next wave, let's fix that. Let's do it right. Let's do it in a way that and I think in a way that it's really, in a lot of ways, what a blockchain, so the new feature of a blockchain is this feature of trust, and that lets you build these new kind of commitments. And what I think would be, let me give you an example, like creative people, so writers, video game makers,
like myself,
podcasters, content editors, creative people. This should be the most, I think this should be the golden period for creators, right? There's 3 billion-ish people with smartphones. That number's gonna go up to 5 billion or something. Almost every adult on earth will have a smartphone, hopefully, in the next few years. You can write something, create something, a piece of music, and instantly have billions of people listening to it or reading it. And it should be a wonderful time, and instead it's not from an economic point of view.
Right.
And that's because if you're a video, you go on YouTube and you read all the controversy around the kind of the revenue share and the deplatforming and all this other kind of stuff. There's a better way to do it. There's a way to do it where we can build digital services that are just as sophisticated as the centralized services today, but have better trust properties that protect the creators and the users. Another way to describe blockchains is, I like to say, is community-owned and operated digital services. So
that's a great definition. So community-owned and operated services. But I have to push back a little bit on this because when trust is a new primitive, which I totally buy for this new computing architecture, you invert the model for where the user's relationship to data, all wonderful. But the reality of crypto today is that it's actually quite centralized in a lot of different companies or miners. One could argue this as a criticism of crypto. I think Bruce Schneier recently wrote a post arguing this as well. How would you respond to those critics? Like, well, this is a great vision, but right now it's actually quite centralized, not really decentralized.
Yeah, I mean, so, I'd say a couple things. One is I think it's still pretty early in the development of these technologies. And so, you say something like Coinbase. I mean, I think over time, as this space grows, I mean, obviously, I hope Coinbase will continue to be very successful. But I think there'll be, just like with the internet, there won't be sort of, it won't just be like Yahoo or something. There'll be, thousands of
Google,
these kinds of, and I think the structure of, this new property of being able to make commitments to people actually should, I think, flatten the distribution. I hope, kind of have a better Gini coefficient or something of the kind of economic rewards here. I mean, that's the hope, and that's what people, if you follow the space, we just had a podcast on governance, it's called, sort of governance is this whole concept of now that we're creating these new systems and you can design kind of granular ways to govern them. So for example, if you had a blockchain that was like Facebook and showed you, news feed kind of stuff, who decides how that algorithm works, right? That's governance, right?
Should it be actually the developers? Yeah. Should it be the people who are the early users even?
That's right.
I mean, there's so many different ways because you actually have more mechanisms now.
And I would say that at least there's a new way to now design those in the proper way, and people are spending a lot of time thinking about it. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed. I mean, it could go wrong.
Right.
And there's all sorts of, I was at a conference recently where they had sort of a talk on ways in which things could get re-centralized, even if this, sort of down the road. And I kind of feel, frankly, as a participant in the sort of first era of the internet, this is the kind of having 4 big incumbents is not how I would have hoped it ended up, frankly.
Right.
So I think it kind of did go awry in a way. And so I hope this is a do-over, that we can make it do a better job this time, the tech community.
That's great. Yeah. What would you tell people in this room who are not just crypto curious, but maybe either, you might be an entrepreneur wanting to start a company, build a decentralized application, or maybe not even just work at a company in the crypto space. It doesn't have to be doing development. It could be marketing. It could be whatever. Yeah. How should they think about the readiness of this? Because so far it's great, but I can't tell if you're talking about something 20 years from now, 10 years from now, or today.
I think one of the things, was we had this kind of crypto bubble in 2017 with prices and news coverage, and I think that sort of misset expectations. It's sort of, the narrative got ahead of the reality, which is people thought this was a more mature technology than it is. It's a fairly early stage technology. I think it's kind of like, so like, it's very interesting if you look at like I was mentioning the kind of history of computing, like, so the Apple II comes out in 77. The growth curve on PCs really started in like 83. So there was this kind of 6-year period, kind of this incubation period, and then there's the growth period. The internet was around in the 60s and 70s, but kind of pretty, getting more users in the 80s and like kind of academia and areas like that. But it was text-based, it was clunky. And then it really took off with, the World Wide Web and Mosaic and all this other stuff. And
graphical user
and then
interface.
smartphones, like, I don't know if people here remember, I'm old enough to have been an active Sidekick, Trio. I had all these devices.
I had
I had
those
the Windows
too.
phone.
I'm
I had
old
all
enough
these
to do
things.
that
Like
too.
from 2001 to 6, I had like 7 different smartphones.
Yeah. Flip phones.
I was very excited about them, and it was like, and I had these friends who were entrepreneurs doing it, and it was, is it ever going to really happen? And we had all these debates about it, and this and that, and then of course, boom, Apple and Android, and now it sounds like ridiculous and like ancient history. But I had friends. I actually had one friend who quit. He quit smartphones in like 2006. It was never going to happen. Like
Smartphones are dead.
Like 2007 was the year. But so I think we're still in that. I think we're still in the kind of pre-iPhone era. And it's never. By the way, I'm giving this historical analogy, but it's never always the same. It's not like we're literally going to have like an iPhone or a physical device or something like this. But there will be a moment where these things are kind of ready, and people start to really figure out the applications. There's a lot of really good entrepreneurs. I mean, this year I've been particularly excited. I mean, the prices are down, and there's a crypto winter. But the innovation, I think, is very strong. We see a lot of people coming out of big tech companies, computer science departments, a lot of very good entrepreneurs. What we need more, though, like, that's why I'm here. I want to convince people. We would love to see more people, entrepreneurs, sort of thinking about these ideas, exploring these areas, people joining these startups. I think this is sort of the kind of Apple II era of this movement. And there's it's a great area to create a career in, and it will be a great area to start a company or whatever. But
I love that you're talking about this as like the homebrew club phase of this, because I remember meeting a lot of those early pioneers of computing as well, and the way they describe it. I mean, you wrote a great blog post about not actually about this, but about just in general what people do on nights and weekends is that eventually becomes what the world does in 10 years. I, however, have a bit more of a conservative risk profile. I'm not the person to necessarily jump to go to a startup. So what would be some of the more immediate applications that people who are interested might want to think about in this space?
Yeah, I mean, so great question. So the first, the obvious first application, so a lot of this stuff started with Bitcoin. And so that's, one application is digital money. And why can you create digital money with a blockchain and not before? PayPal could say we have PayPal currency, but are you gonna, and they say we only have 21 million of them, but like they could change the rules. Like, are you really gonna trust it? Do you really own that PayPal coin or whatever? With Bitcoin, you really own it. The rules are baked in. It's not gonna change.
So money is an application.
I think there's a sense in which you own a Bitcoin in the sense in which you own your phone, and it's very different than the sense in which you own your Facebook profile. Let me put it that way. And that's one. And there's very cool stuff happening. So like there's a couple. Some people think that it would be more useful as a payment mechanism if it were stable. And there's a whole bunch of really interesting what are called stablecoin projects, some of which are live and working, and it's really interesting to watch. Where they're a cryptocurrency and they're pegged to the US dollar. And so one of the cool things with that, so for example, they're about, depending on which estimate you look at, there's something like over 1 billion people who have smartphones now but don't have bank accounts, mostly in the developing world.
The unbanked is the phrase that a lot of people talk about.
They don't have government IDs, and there's no plan. I've talked to people at banks. They have no plan to bank them.
It's not financially viable for them.
And they don't, and it's literally like it's a government infrastructure problem. Like they don't have, people that don't have IDs don't have so anyway, so one of the cool things with crypto is these are bearer assets, which means that kind of like gold or something, if I give you a DAI, which is one of these stable coins, Maker DAI, if I give you a DAI, you can check that you got the DAI using math. You don't have to ping a bank and say, hey bank, did that person have the money? Can I have the money? You can do it just with math, and that's very important for that population that doesn't have access to those systems. As an example, it also makes what I think from a programmer point of view. If you're a developer or entrepreneur, it suddenly money becomes like the way photos and text are today. You can just send photo. You can build an app on the iPhone. Like you can embed photos and text, and you can send photos and text over email, and they're just bits, right? You can just send bits.
Yeah,
you don't
can't
need
do
to
that
ask.
with money right now.
You don't have to get permission. You don't have to say like, PhotoCorp, can I use, photo, it's a file format, you can send it, now money is a file format, and you can send it with something like a DAI, right?
Yeah.
You can send it like a file format, you can build stuff on it, you can do whatever you want, no one's gonna change the rules, no one can change the rules, it makes money like the way, as simple as, and as seamless and as global as email.
Right.
And that's just one, and then there's-
Just one note on that really quick, connecting it back to your idea of a blockchain computer.
Yeah.
Stablecoins have all the properties of the borderless that you're describing.
Yeah.
It can, because it's built on blockchains, you can essentially have all the best properties of permissionless, decentralized computing, and then actually bring all these people into the system, because you can't do that with the current system. So I love that it connects back to your idea of blockchain as a computer. So, okay, so we have money, stable coins, people talk about DeFi, like decentralized finance.
So Maker is this thing built on Ethereum, like how do they build it? They build it with what are called smart contracts. So smart contracts are basically code that is built on a blockchain. The code can't change. Once the code is autonomous code, some people call it. Once you've built, right now as we speak, these maker systems are running, nobody's operating them, the team that created them can't change them. It's code out in the cloud that's just like running, and it's there, and it's
I like the word contract.
you can go and you can read it, and I've read it myself. You can go on GitHub and you can read the code and you can see what the code does, and that code will always do that, and and no one can change that. And so in that way you can create a commitment, right? A programmatic commitment to people, and you can do sort of cool stuff like Maker's one example. Augur is another cool thing where it's sort of this ability to create kind of prediction markets and do other kind of interesting stuff like that. There's a whole concept of what people call DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. So there's like, there was a kind of it was this whole, if you follow the space, there was this whole,
the DAO hack.
This thing called the DAO hack. This project got hacked, and it was bad. But the idea is coming back, and you're going to see a bunch of these, which are basically like, for example, people are creating a DAO that basically replaces venture capital. So instead of having a centralized, we're a centralized service. You have a centralized service bottlenecked by humans or something. You have this kind of cloud hive mind of in the same way that Wikipedia is sort of this cloud hive mind of participants in this DAO who collectively decide how to allocate the capital, right? And it's these are experiments, but they're really cool experiments.
Yeah, some I would argue are even more than experiments. I mean, they're real. They're working. Some are working for over a year. They're moving like a good amount of money on them. So the big message I'm hearing, the big takeaways for the group are homebrew club phase, exciting. There's more to come. It's the early days. There's actually a lot of immediate applications, including things that are currently centralized that could be decentralized, as well as entirely new things that were not possible.
Yep. Because
of the fact that they're built on this completely distributed, decentralized computer. Any other parting takeaways for the group?
Well, I would just say, I think one other kind of interesting thing I think too is that if you look at these past computer movements, some of them I would say are inside out and some are outside in. So by inside out, I would say the iPhone, right? It was Apple and Google who did it, and they kind of took over and as a result collected a lot of the money that came out of that. The PC was more outside in, right? It was these hackers and hobbyists. This is an outside in, it's very much like these kind of hackers. Anyone can join. It's a very inclusive community. It's global. It comes really kind of out of. I mentioned the computing movement, but it also comes out of the open source movement, which is I think to me is one of the most important things that's happened over the last 20 years in technology. And I think it's been a wonderful thing in terms of net benefit to society and creating these new open systems. And so so I think that also means you don't need a factory, you don't need $1 billion in capital. You can be a relatively small group of creative people and do something really impactful here. So I just would sort of an advertisement to say that. If you're curious about this area, we have a lot of resources on our website. Sonal has created. So we'd encourage you to read more, and we'd love for more people to enter the space as entrepreneurs or joining companies, and we'd like to be a resource to be helpful if you decide to do that.
It's the next Homebrew Club phase. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to our session.
Thank you.